hope you have enjoyed the home and away cases I've covered with other podcasters recently. I've certainly enjoyed the collaborations, and I will likely do more collaborations in the future. However, for the next wee while, I'm going to go back to it just being me telling you about murders that have taken place in Scotland. Going forward, I'm unlikely to cover very recent cases, as I do take into account how this may potentially affect victims' family members, unless I am able to speak to family members about their loved ones. So to give me a bit of time to research and write more episodes, Scottish Murders will be taking a short break. Therefore, today's episode is from my other podcast, The Blue Way, featuring Stephen Keogh, a retired Metropolitan detective who I've spoken to on Scottish Murders before, and Anthony McNeil, a retired Michigan police officer, who in this episode talk about what led them to join the police, the training they received, and some of their experiences within the police.
Hi, my name is Anthony McNeil. I'm a retired police officer from the city of Southfield. I served 20 years with the city. I currently live in the state of Michigan. Southfield is just outside of the city of Detroit. And I retired in 2013 from the city. During my time with the department, I was a patrol officer, a detective. I worked commercial property crimes. I was a hostage negotiator, field training officer, or FTO, and I was the secretary or the treasurer for our union, and I did a whole lot of things while I was there. But now, like I said, I retired in 2013, and I've just been a husband. You know, my wife and I just celebrated our 31st anniversary. We're proud parents of two awesome daughters who are both grown, and we just had celebrated our first grandchild's first birthday last month. So we're just living that grandparent life right now.
Oh, congratulations. It's hard not to comment when you're speaking, but that's so nice. Oh, you've got a great life going on there.
Yeah, no complaints.
And do you all live close together, so you're seeing them often?
Yes, we're all probably 15 minutes from each other. Well, my youngest daughter lives in Washington, D.C., but, you know, the rest of the family is all here, and we all literally live maybe 15 minutes from each other.
That's nice. Close family.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. You know, growing up, my mom, my dad, you know, they divorced at an early age. You know, I'm the oldest of two siblings, or three children altogether. I have two siblings, a sister and a brother, and my sister lives in Atlanta. My brother lives here, again, probably 10 minutes away from me. So.
Oh, that's nice. I wish I had that. My sister's down here, my grand's down here now, but the rest of us are kind of scattered about, and it's kind of a few hours to get to each other. So I would like that. That would be nice.
Yeah, it's convenient, you know, when it's time to run errands or need to pick up something. You know, my mom only lives 10 minutes from us, so that's nice. You know, when we need to run over and help her with something, or she wants to come over and see the grandchild, her great-great-grandchild.
But you must be over the moon.
Yeah, absolutely.
How old is she? Sorry, out of nosiness.
My mom? She will be 79 in April.
Still young.
78 or 79.
Still young. She can really enjoy that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, she's going strong. For her age, she is definitely going strong.
Oh, that's really good. Oh, okay. So you kind of did mention there about you growing up, where you grew up, and you grew up with your mum and your brothers. Is there anything else you want to say about that?
It's funny, you know, growing up, and I'll go back into my dad when I get into the police part here in a little bit. But, you know, my parents, like I say, I was in the 9th grade, I believe it was, when they divorced. And, you know, my father was a alcoholic, and when he didn't drink, he was the best father in the world, you know, and I've learned a lot from him, you know, despite the downfalls or the shortcomings that he may have had. You know, I always like to say he taught me how to be a man, you know, and he had his issues, like we all do. But, you know, when he didn't have a drink, he was the best father on the planet. And it wasn't until, you know, he got the alcohol in him. And that's when, you know, that caused him and my mom to divorce. And, you know, unfortunately, my father passed away at the age of 44 due to cancer.
Oh.
And, you know, it's it's ironic because I was just about to start the academy. Well, I was going through what is called MCO, which is the training process to get into the academy. And he passed away, I think it was 3 days before I was supposed to do that. And I remember doing part of the physical training aspect. I was not in great shape and I didn't think I could do it. I was ready to give up. And his voice popped into my head and said, "Don't you dare stop." And that's what helped me get through it.
Oh, God, that's so
Yeah.
young, but that was lovely that you still had that impact in your life.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Like I said, he had his fun. He was a good man until he started drinking, and that was his downfall, unfortunately.
It's a horrible thing, alcoholism.
Yeah.
So before you even thought about going into the police, what were you doing? I know you said you were a cook.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I worked at a restaurant I was a busboy at the time, and I worked my way up to cook. But after high school, I played high school football, and I went on to play a year of college football. And I have to be honest, I hated school. But I ended up tearing up my knee while I was there playing, and I lost interest in school, and I ended up coming back home. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I did know what I wanted to do. I just didn't know how I was going to do it. And I wanted to own a business. That was something I always wanted to do. I just didn't have the means, the credit, the resources, or anything at the time because I was 22, 23 years old at the time. So I went back to work at the restaurant that I was working at when I was in high school. And I ended up staying there for, I believe it was another 4 or 5 years or something like that. And one day, it was between lunch and dinner break. I'm standing up at the front of the restaurant, and the new chief of police at that time walks in, Chief Thomas, and he introduces himself, and he was coming to speak with the business owner. And I just happened to be standing up front when he walked in. And while he was waiting for the owner to come out, he looked at me and he said, "Have you ever thought about being a police officer?" And in my mind, I was like, hell no. I had no interest in going into law enforcement. Like I said, I wanted to start a business at some point. But after talking to him for a minute, I started thinking, that's how I can get the money I need to start my business. And, he told me about the city's cadet program, which they had at the time. And he encouraged me to go apply for it, which I did. And I believe there was like 200, 250 applicants at the time. And I finished number 3 out of all those people on the list. And I got hired as a police cadet. And I think I was a cadet for maybe 6 months before I ended up going to the actual police academy. And, I ended up going to the academy, and I think I was in the academy 6 months. I can't remember the exact length of time, but that was an experience. But yeah, I got out of the academy and started my career.
Hi, my name's Steve Keogh. I used to be a police officer. I left the police in, what is it now, November 21. So, oh, wow, that's two and a bit years. It's gone so quick. So since leaving the police, I've had a couple of books published, and I've got my own TV show, weirdly, which I still, when I say this out loud, it does sound a bit odd, and I still can't get my head around it. Someone with a face for radio having their own TV show. But anyway, I've got that coming out on the 20th of March on True Crime, which is called Secrets of a Murder Detective, which is really quite exciting that that's coming out. And I'm just doing bits and bobs. So when I was in the police, I started the police way back in 1991, which makes me feel old now. But to me, it still feels like it was yesterday. And I got posted to South London, and I policed the area that I grew up in. And I grew up on a council estate. So I had some interesting times meeting people and arresting people I went to school with, but hey ho, it's character building.
Tell me about what you did before you even thought about going into the police.
So I joined the police quite young. I was 20 when I joined. So I hadn't done an awful lot before. But what I did do, I started to train to be an accountant, and it was really dull. It was really boring. And so I worked in an accountancy firm that backed onto the Old Bailey, and our offices overlooked where the prison vans used to come in. And I'd be sat there trying to work out why spending hours why two columns didn't add up. Oh, it was really dull doing this accountancy stuff. And then like there'd be these prison vans would swoop in with blue lights and sirens and like probably IRA terrorists or whatever it would be. And I'd look out the window thinking, that life looks so much more exciting than mine. And and I was quite into a program called The Bill that was on at that time. Just made me think that there's got to be more to life than this. So I completely left field for somebody from my background. None of my family would have ever have dreamt of joining the police. In fact, most of them were more likely to end up in prison than putting people there. So I was probably the first person on my estate ever to have joined the police. But yeah, I joined at 20 and I never looked back. I loved it. I really enjoyed it. Did 30 years. So I got posted, and my first posting was to the area I grew up in. So I ended up arresting people that I went to school with, etc. But it gave me a good grounding because for me, policing, there are two really important elements when it comes to policing. It's knowing the area you police and knowing the people you're policing. And I had a head start on that. And I very quickly built up a reputation for knowing who the criminals were. And if it wasn't because I went to school with them, it was because I grew up with them. And if I didn't know them directly, I knew the type of person they were. And if I stopped a car and I was talking to someone, I had a good feeling for who I was talking to because I lived that area all my life.
How did you go down with your friends who you were arresting, at that time?
So when it comes to how the people I went to school with reacted, it was twofold really. The people that I was friendly with, they weren't criminals. They've now gone on to have good jobs and own businesses and stuff. So the ones that took exception to me joining the police, they weren't in my immediate circle. When you're at school, you have friends that you're friends with, and you have other people that you're just acquaintance with because they're in your same class or year. So if they got upset, it didn't really bother me. The people that I was close to, they accepted the fact I was joining the police, and I think found it quite funny and like some of the stories that I come home with. So yeah, it caused some friction in terms of like a couple of people I arrested were like, maybe give me a little bit of abuse, but it's water off a duck's back and it didn't bother me at all.
What was the training like? How did you get into it? Do you have to do tests or do you just apply? How do you get into being training?
When I joined all the way back then, I think things were a bit different to how they are now. So I had to do an application on paper. It wasn't online because nobody had computers back then. Oh, we did, but the computers we used were with these really basic programs so you didn't have anything like email. So I had to do a paper application, send that in. And once you got through that, then you got invited it was like a 2-day, and you stayed there. You actually went away and you stayed in Hendon. And I can't remember the exact order of things, but there was a fitness test, which was something like, it was like 1.5 miles in 12 minutes or something like that. So although at the time I thought, well, this isn't bad, compared to what it is now, it's really, really bad because the test to get into the police now, they've really watered it down. But back then, you had to have a fair level of fitness, and you had to do push-ups and sit-ups and jumps and all kinds of things. Then you had to do a medical, and the medical was one of the things that stick in my mind because there was some really weird parts to it, which I look back now, I think, was this necessary? So one of them was you'd have to strip off, and they'd give you these sort of robes to put on. And you'd walk into this room in front of 3 doctors, and you took the robe off and you stood there stark naked. And so one of the things they would do, they would get you to stand on your toes. So you sort of stood up on your toes, then you have to turn over, turn around, and bend over in front of them, showing them your backside.
Steve, was this an initiation or something?
So I've no idea what they were looking for, but whatever they were hoping not to find, I obviously didn't have it because they let me in. I don't know what it was. I dread to think, or whether, looking back now on what we know about some practices in the past, whether it was just some sort of weird fetish that they had. I don't know. But anyway, whatever it was, you're so keen to join the police. It's like, oh yeah, I'll do that. God knows what I would have done beyond that if they had said to me, because you just want to get in. And you had an eyesight test, and my eyes weren't very good. So when I walked into the room, I think I was wearing contact lenses at the time, but you had to do a test without contact lenses as well. So the first thing I did when I got in the room was I clocked a line about 4 down. I thought, well, yeah, if I can read that one. So I quickly, as I'm talking, I memorized the 4 or 5 letters it was.
Yeah.
The one I thought would be the first one I'd struggle on. So I memorized that. That sounds a bit corrupt, doesn't it? Just joining the police, and you're trying to look. Yeah. I come from the state I come from. There are ways and means of doing things, and so I can say it now. Because what are they going to do? Sack me? Done 30 years. Okay, I take back my 30 years because you failed your eyesight test. But I get through that. Then there was an interview, and the interview, they focused in on the fact of the area that I grew up in, and they seemed to go on about, oh, you must have come across a lot of drugs in your time, and your friends are doing drugs, and you were doing drugs. I'm like, no. And I actually, because the way they did the interviews was, if the closer you lived to, it was Paddington Police Station where we were doing interviews. So the closer you lived there, the later you were in the interview process. So like there were some people from Ireland, so they interviewed those first so they could get off. And because I lived in London, I was one of the last to go in, and I would have been 19 at the time because I joined just after my 20th birthday at Hendon. So I would have been 19 when I did these interviews, and people would leave the room, do the interviews, and come back in, and there were so many of them were coming back and being told that they'd failed because they needed to go away and get life experience. And when you're 19 and you've got people that are right in their late 20s getting told this, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I mean, what chance have I got? I mean, I was at school a few weeks ago. And so I went into it quite sort of blasé, really thinking, well, I mean, if they're knocking back all these people on the lack of life experience, I've literally only just come out of school, got no chance. But there and then they tell you whether you passed or failed, and they told me I was in, and I couldn't believe it.
You were amenable in the medical. They were like, "Aye, we'll have him.
he'll do anything, so we'll have him in." So I went home, and then there was a wait, and I can't remember exactly how long, but it was about six to 8 months to wait before you get told that you're joining, that you've got your start date. And I started on the 28th of October 1991, and Sunday night I went up to Hendon, and I vividly remember it like it was yesterday. And I stood there at urinals, and next to me was a fella, and we both looked at each other, and we both said, "What the hell are we doing here?" It was like so daunting that you were going to do 20 weeks of joining the police, and I just moved in with my girlfriend at the time, who I ended up marrying, and we just got a flat, and it was a big wrench for me to go up to Hendon and think I'm going to be doing 20 weeks there residential. What? And you've got no idea what to expect. It was really daunting, and I got to be honest, I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't like the training.
So tell me, what was it like being at the academy then? You said it was an experience. What happens there?
Oh man, and during my time in the academy, it's funny. They teach you, as I always say, not how to be the police, because once you get out of the academy and actually get on the job, the things that you learn are so different. You get, I guess you can say, real world experience, where in the academy, things are controlled, and they try to make scenarios as real as possible, but nothing beats actually going through it. But it was just funny because, like I said, this academy was about 6 weeks or 6 months long, I believe it was. And it was a hard time. I went to one of the toughest academies around at the time, and they were really into physical training. And I think when I left the academy, I was probably in the best shape I had ever been in my life. But getting to that point was interesting. You know, the very first day of the academy, I'll never forget this. We're in our what we called our briefing room, and one of the squad leaders comes in and he asks everyone to put their driver's license on the table. And I think there were 50 people in my class at the time, and 20 people didn't have their license on them. They said they were out in their car. So he asked those 20 to go out and get their license out of the car. And I think maybe 3 came back.
Really?
Yeah. 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 It was a fun time during the academy. You know, I met a lot of cool guys, worked, you know, had that whole experience of just learning what law enforcement was all about. Especially for someone that had no interest in going into law enforcement. It was all so new to me. You know, I didn't have any family members that were ever in the profession or anything like that. So going that route for me, it was all eye-opening. And going through the physical training, it was really hard. But halfway through, you know, I started to really realize that I was getting into shape. And and like I said, by the time we were done, I was in probably the best shape I had ever been in my life. And, you know, I had a lot of characters in my academy class, and each week we would take turns being the squad leader. And the week that it was my turn, I'll never forget this. I was up all night studying, and I had to be at the academy that morning, I think at like 7:00 or something. And I woke up and I couldn't find my car keys. So I'm scrambling, trying to find my keys. I couldn't find them. Once I finally found them, I'm breaking my neck trying to get to the academy, which was about 30, 40 minutes away. And I'm almost there, and I wouldn't have been late, but a train was coming, and a train ended up slowing me down. And I was, I think, 10 minutes late as a result of that. And as I walk in, I just knew the drill. The director looks at me and he just says, "Hit the ground." I think I was doing push-ups the rest of the day.
No.
Yeah.
That's the punishment.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I definitely got punished. But, you know, it was funny because they played a lot of mind tricks on you during the academy, during like the first 3 to 4 months. And it was to get you ready for the job. And we, you know, again, as someone that had never gone through that, you didn't know what to expect. So the games, you know, the mind games, they kind of mess with you a little bit. But it wasn't until probably 2 months to the end of the academy, that's when it sunk in that why they were doing what they were doing, you know, and it was to prepare you for what you were going to be dealing with once you get out on the street. You know, so I really enjoyed that aspect. And, you know, after I graduated, I had an opportunity to go back and talk to the next group of recruits that was coming in, which was a lot of fun. And that was one of the things I tried to explain to them was, you know, you're going to do things while you're here and you're going to question, why are we doing this? But in the end, it'll all come together. You know, it's kind of like Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid, when he had him painting the fence and all that. It's like, what does that have to do with karate? Why am I doing this? It was kind of that type thing, you know, but it all worked out in the end.
That's a good analogy. And especially because you went into it, you know, not necessarily, you know, this is what you wanted to do, but as a means to an end at the beginning. So it was good that it kind of, you know, clicked in with you that this is good. I want to do this.
Yeah. And one important thing I left out about the academy, the very first night that I started the academy, I proposed to my wife, which was good and bad because I proposed and I immediately had to leave right afterwards because I had to go meet some of the other guys to go study.
Oh, that's so sweet, though. That's a good way to remember it. My first day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, And she's been with you ever since. How long were you with your wife before that?
We were only dating. Yeah, we only dated. I think we met in September of 92, and we were married in February of 93.
When you know,
So,
you know.
yeah, yep, absolutely. And I always tell her from the day that I saw her, I knew she was going to be my wife.
Did she feel the same?
I don't know. You have to ask her that. That's a good question. I'm going to ask her that when we get off of this.
Oh no, what have I started? So what is it you have to do to be a cadet? You have to apply to be a cadet, and not everybody gets. And then after you've been a cadet for a while, then you get to the police academy. Is that the process?
Yeah, what I had to do to get into the cadet program was I had to take a written test. And that was about a 3-hour process. And honestly, I didn't think I passed it. I didn't know how good I did, because there was a lot of things on there that I had never heard of or, had any experience with. So it was a really tough test. Apparently I did good. I like I say, I finished number 3 out of all the people in that session. And once you passed, you made it through the test, then you had to go meet with a psychologist, and you did an interview with the psychologist, and they just wanted to make sure you were stable enough to come on the job and do what you had to do. And from there, it was just going out. The cadet, the cadet program back then is different now, the way the city does it. But back then, it was just kind of a stepping stone to become an officer, because we did a lot of things that really had nothing to do with law enforcement. I remember one day I spent 8 hours sorting football cards that were part of our DARE programs for one of the schools or something. So, you did things like that. Our biggest task was to go out and write parking tickets. But it really was nothing that really taught you or really prepared you. I mean, there were some things, you got to do ride-alongs with officers, so you got to see firsthand what that was like. But for the most part, the cadet program back then, like I said, it was really just a way to get your foot in the door. And, if you were able to do well as a cadet, then they would send you to the academy. And it's the cadet program with the city now is a lot different. They do a lot more things to prepare them to become officers. So it has evolved over the years into a program that it should have been from the beginning.
That's interesting. Okay. I'm curious because I'm coming from a background of nothing. It's just I'm interested. So I'm curious to speak to you how it was for you, and then how it is. I'm just quite interested, and you can compare.
Yeah. It's in each here in the States, each department that has a cadet type program, I think they're all pretty much ran probably close to the same. They may be called different things in some cities. They may be called explorers, or have different names for them. But at the end of the day, it's all pretty much the same. And we do a lot of the same tasks. It's just really just kind of like the minor leagues to introduce you into the profession.
What were some of the things you did then?
So there was a lot of academic stuff. So you had to learn the law. You had to learn, for instance, what theft was, the processes for arrest and searching people, and what you can and can't do. There was lots of police have lots of powers, but we don't live in a police state. So one of the things you have to learn is, well, when can I use my powers, and what words do I have to use if I have to inform somebody? So if you're searching somebody for drugs, you have to be able to tell them certain words. And so there's lots of things you have to learn, and learn about firearms and what's an offensive weapon and different types of assaults. There's loads and loads you have to learn. This side, I actually found it came naturally to me because, as I said, I wasn't long out of school. So it was just an extension of school to me. So I didn't really struggle with that at all. There were other people that were older and they'd sort of been in the army and something. I think they really struggled having to suddenly learn loads when they hadn't for a long time. I just found it. I didn't like being away from home. Like I say, I just moved in with my girlfriend at the time, and it was a real wrench for me having to go up there. You having to march everywhere and have your uniform, so everything have to be perfectly ironed and your shoes have to be shining. Like it's a hangover from the military, really. I think a lot of what you do. But you get through it, and what you do is you end up. So when I did it, there were four intakes, and you're always looking at the intakes before, thinking, "Oh, I wish I was there, And then the ones that were going out, having their passing out parade, was like, "Wow, they're going out into the big wide world." But eventually, you get through it, and you go out, and you start at a police station. There's like the lowest of the low. It's like you're brand new out. You come out, and you just haven't got a clue, really. I mean. Although I grew up in the area, it's very different living in an area than policing it. But I adapted to it quite quickly. I remember one of the station inspectors saying to me, "Oh, you've taken to it like water," which at the time was like a real boost, because like you want to do well, you want to do a good job. And when he said that, it was really pleasing, and I seemed to take to it quickly. And as I say, I think a huge part of that is growing up in an area and knowing the people, and look, when you grow up on a council estate, you do end up situations where sometimes because you're a bit more switched on than other people, you think, well, I'm going to walk away now, and others don't, and they get themselves arrested and stuff. And I saw things, and I probably did stuff as a kid that I shouldn't have done. So you just kind of build up a good idea of what the people in the area you are, who they are, what they're doing, what they're up to, what they shouldn't be doing. And that was definitely was a head start for me.
So what happens then once you've been at the academy, done your training? Do you get a certificate? Do you get a graduation? What happens?
Yeah, once you leave the academy and graduate the academy, you are then officially certified with the state of Michigan. To be in law enforcement. And, there's a ceremony that they have for graduation where, your family and friends get to come in and spend time and celebrate with you and things like that. But after that, you go on to your department and you start working. You enter the FTO program, the field training program. And that's where you really learn the job. I can't remember how long the FTO program was. I think it was, I want to say 6 months. But you're on probation for a whole year. And during that 6-month period, you're pretty much an at-will employee. So they really don't need a reason to fire you. Most people make it through the program. And the way the program works is that once you get assigned to an FTO, you bounce around from shift to shift as what we call a FTO, a field training officer. And that's so that you can get exposed to the different things that happen on each shift, because each shift is different. Day shift is different from working nights and things like that. So you bounce around a lot during that period, and you are assigned different FTOs through each step of the program. There are 4 steps, I believe it is, if I remember correctly, to the FTO program. And you have to, each day you're in the car with your recruiting officer, you have to get graded on this whole sheet of tasks that you are to do throughout the day. And depending on how you get graded, depends on if you pass it or not. And each week, the FTO, the recruiting officers, they hold a meeting and they discuss your performance and where you're lacking and where you can be better, and what some of the things that you're good at. And if you need additional training, then they'll set up training for you to go through scenarios or whatever it is that you're lacking in. They'll set up specific training for you to go through that. But it's a very stressful time because your livelihood is at risk, and you don't know anything coming out of the academy. I mean, once you get on the street, my first day on the street, it was an eye opener. I'll never forget the first traffic stop I made. My FTO, we stopped this gentleman. His driver's license had like 40 suspensions on it, so we were going to arrest him. And this guy was probably 6'6", maybe 320 pounds, all muscle. And I'm only 5'7". I think at the time I was maybe 170 pounds or so. And my FTO wasn't much bigger. And he looks at me and he says, "Whatever you do, don't piss this guy off."
How did you handle that then? How did you go about that?
Well, that was one of the things I learned very early, is that you have to learn how to be a good BSer with people, and you have to learn how to schmooze people, and you have to know who you can talk to in certain ways. And with this gentleman, it was trying to keep everything even keel so that he doesn't get excited, and I remember trying to play it, keep it light by laughing. Like, come on, man, you got all these suspensions. You're not supposed to be driving. We made a joke out of it. I tried to be human with him, and tried to forget that I was the cop that was arresting him, and tried to be like it was one of his buddies, like, you messed up, you shouldn't have been doing that, and you learn how to interact with people in that way, because who, if things go sideways, it's not going to be good. But I end up making it through the FTO program. It was like I said, it was rough because it was very stressful, getting graded every day. Every little thing you did was under a microscope. And I'll never forget the one time I thought I was going to get fired. We had a run come out about 2 girls with guns. And we were at one end of the city, and they were all the way at the other end of the city, which was about 7 or 8 miles away. By the time myself and my recruiter got there, some other officers had already stopped these young ladies, and they were searching the car when we pulled up. Now, as a field training officer, you're expected to, when you get on scene, you're expected to take over, because they want to see you perform. So when I got there, the 2 young ladies were standing up on the sidewalk talking to some other officers, and there were other officers going through their car looking for the guns. So when we arrived, I went over and I started talking to the girls, got their information, went and talked to some of the other officers. And when it was all over, said and done, we didn't find a gun or anything, but my recruiter, he ended up giving me a 3. The minimum score that you're allowed to get was a 4, I believe it was. But he gave me a 1 or a 1 or a 2 or something like that, or a 3 for officer safety. And his reasons was because when we arrived on scene, I didn't pat down the 2 girls. And my logic was, well, this was a hot run about people with guns. These other officers who made first contact pulled these girls out of the car. I'm going to assume that these veteran officers searched these girls once they got up. So it's kind of redundant for me to go and do it. So and this is where I thought I was going to get fired. This is where that comes in. The next night, we get just a report run. Someone had their car stolen or something. So it was we just had to take a report on it. And when we get to the gentleman's house, he comes to the door, and I looked at him and I said, "Sir, can you put your hands up on the door?" And he looks at me puzzled, and he's like, "Why?" And then my recruiter looks at me and goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm patting him down." he said, "You're taking this a little too far, aren't you?" I said, well, I didn't think I needed to pat those girls down yesterday, and I got written up for it. So now I'm going to pat this guy down.
How did that go down then?
It didn't go down too well. Yeah, we got called back to the station, and I had to have a talk with the lieutenant and everything. And he saw my point. I said, honestly, Lieutenant, if we would have been the first car to stop those girls, I would have pat them down. But there were probably 6 other officers there. We arrived 5 minutes after they had already what was the reason I was going to pat them down other than I'm just in the FTO program?
Yeah.
It didn't make sense. If anything, it probably would have made the girls upset because they were already patted down once. So here I am coming 5 minutes later, patting them down again.
Yeah. Yeah, that wouldn't go down well with the kiddos.
Exactly.
No.
So, but it was just those types of things throughout the FTO program that were stressful. You really had to be on your P's and Q's. And for me, I'm the type of person, I kind of pick up things relatively quickly. And I was having a ball doing the job at that time because all the stuff was all new to me. And I got through the FTO program with no problems. And, I ended up making it through my probation, which, like I said, is a year from the time you start the program. But it was just a lot of fun at the time. A lot of stress, now because you're bouncing from shift to shift. Not getting a lot of sleep and a lot of rest, because if you're working nights, you get off at night, then you have to go to court sometimes in the morning, and you could be there for 3-4 hours in the morning, been up all night. And, my wife and I, like I said, we had just gotten married at the time. And when we first had our child, it was just a lot, so that part of it wasn't fun. But once you get to work and the adrenaline hits and everything, that's what keeps you going.
So you would come off and you'd work a night shift, come off, and then have to go to court for maybe most of the day, and then go back on a night shift again.
Yep.
Is that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. When did you sleep?
Not a whole lot. Yeah, I usually
Wow.
I usually didn't sleep a whole lot, and later on in my career, it was about 3 years into my career. Like I said, I had always wanted to start a business. So I ended up starting that business. I actually left the department after 3 years once I had saved up the money to start the business. And I still have the business to this day. When I was gone, I think I was gone about 14 or 18 months, something like that. And once we got the business up and running, my chief called me and asked me if I wanted to come back to work. And I ended up going back, and, I ended up spending the rest of my career there, and we kept the business at the same time.
That's a lot. So you had your passing out parade, and then you straight away you knew what police station you were going into? Did you have somebody that you had, a supervisor that you would go about with, or were you just out on your own?
So what happened when we started out at the police station, you had something that was called street duties, and it was 10 weeks, and so 6 of us joined our police station at the same time, and it was referred to as being puppy walked. So you would, for the first, off the top of my head, something like first 4 or 5 weeks, everywhere you went, you would have one of these tutors with you. And then as you learned to do a few of the bits that they taught you, such as stopping cars and giving poor motorists tickets, you haven't got your seatbelt on, I have to give you a ticket. And say, this poor sod has to pay a £30 fine because I'm learning how to write out process books or whatever, fixed penalty notices. And so you do things like that, and they'll take you to like a no entry sign. And again, motorists who are trying to get to work quickly were getting stopped by us and getting tickets and points on their license just so we can learn how to write out evidence.
God, that's mean.
And so you do things like that. And then after a while, then they put you out in pairs. So like there's 2 of you out together. And then eventually you're out on your own, and so by the time you get to your team, you've been through that process, and things are very different back then as well. So nowadays, certainly I can't even talk for the Metropolitan Police in London because I don't know how all the other police forces work, but back then, uniform officers would deal with all their own prisoners. They would they'd interview prisoners. They'd take them to court and everything. So we would do that in that time. So 10 weeks of, if the control room knew that there was a street duties on, all the rubbish calls would come to you. So like, there's a shoplifter, send the street duties down. There's somebody's died suddenly, send the street duties down. Everything that other people didn't want to go to, they send the street duties. But brilliant, because you're learning how to deal with those crimes. And I found that so I went on to deal with murderers and arresting murderers and dealt with terrorists and whatever. But my grounding was those early days of dealing with shoplifters and more minor crimes, because I was learning the process. I was learning how to deal with people, getting comfortable arresting them, interviewing them, and everything. So everything's little building blocks. So mine started back then on the street duties, and in many ways they've taken that away in London. Like a lot of nowadays, they have teams that take on the prisoners from the uniform officers, so they're not building up their core skills of interviewing and arresting. Well, they do arresting, but everything else after that is taken out of their hands, which I don't agree with. So yeah, so you learn and you build up, and you do, and this is the same as it was back then. You do 2 years probation. So we used to be called a probie. I don't think you probably call them that anymore, because you get called you're bullying or something. I don't know, but I was a probie for 2 years. Making the tea, and there was this thing where there would regularly be new probationers coming to a police station, but after we joined, there was like one lot came after us about 6 weeks later, and then none for the whole of my probation. So I was always like the lowest. Like I could never transfer that sort of "you got to make the tea now" to anybody else. So every time you look down, it was like, well, I've got no one to look down to now. It's always me. But yeah, so after about 2 years. Early on in my career, I had this idea that I thought I might want to be a dog handler. But then what I sort of gravitated to, what I enjoyed the most was catching criminals. And to me, I mean, I was young at the time. It felt like a game. It was like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to catch people committing crimes. Like, so you'd stop people and you'd find them with weapons or drugs or out burgling or breaking into cars. To me, it was a game. It was like, I'm quite competitive in life anyway, and my competitive side was, when I came on duty, I wanted to go out and catch someone committing a crime. And when you do that, you sort of gravitate towards crime, and the natural progression from that is to become a detective. So back then, what would happen was joining the CID wasn't easy. Now it's almost like a punishment posting. They've got the lack of DCs. They throw people into the CID who don't want to be there. But back then it was you had to work your way into it. So the way it worked was that you would be invited to apply to join a crime squad. And the crime squad was your way into the CID. And what they were, it was a proactive team, generally targeting drug dealers. But it could be if there was a particular problem, say cars being broken into in a particular area, you might set up an operation around that and do some observation posts and whatnot. But essentially, you're targeting the problem crimes, mostly drugs. And then if you prove yourself on that, then you can then go into the CID as on one of the like burglary squad, robbery squad, or whatever. So that was the path that you used to have to go down, and it was really good grounding. And I had an attachment on the burglary squad in my probation, I think, and I didn't want to go down that route straight away. So I ended up doing 6 years, I think, in uniform before I decided, right, I feel like now. My attitude in life has always been, and this is advice I always give to other police officers when they're coming through, is don't be in a rush. People, I noticed at the end of my career, everybody wanted everything now. So when they were joining, they were coming to me on a murder team and saying, well, how do I be a murder squad detective? And I was like, well, learn to be a police officer first, and then learn to be a detective. And then once you've got the grounding of a detective, then go and deal with the more serious crimes. And so my attitude was, I'm in uniform, I'm enjoying it, which is the most important thing. I'm learning, and as long as I'm enjoying it and learning, I'm going to keep on doing it. And then about 6 years, I felt ready then to apply to the crime squad again. Well, not again, but I got invited the first time after like 2 years, and I thought, no, it's too early. then after about 6 years, I thought, right, I'm ready now. I applied for the crime squad, got it. And then that's when the journey down at being a detective sort of really started.
So you'd finished your probationary period. So what job were you doing when you left to start your own business?
What I was doing with the police department at the time?
Yeah.
When I first started, when I got out of the FTO program, I worked patrol for 3 years. For 2 years. And then going into my third year, I had an opportunity to go become a detective.
Wow.
Which is unusual because most detectives have longer than 2 years on the job, but there was something going on and there was an opening and nobody wanted to fill it. So myself and one other new guy that I had gotten hired with, we were kind of volunteered into that position.
I see. Okay. Volunteered. Okay.
Yeah. And I actually loved it because it gave me an opportunity to see another side of law enforcement and police work. And I got to see the backside of how things work once people are arrested or trying to figure out crimes and why they happen, how they happen, and things like that. And just the whole process of going to court, all of those different types of things, writing the warrants to arrest people. These are all things that you don't learn necessarily in patrol because you don't deal with them, you know? So once I got into the detective bureau, that was a lot of fun. Just the tools that you have accessible to you as an investigator to investigate crimes, and things like that. And I did that. I think I was there maybe a year, just over a year before I ended up leaving to start the business.
That was part 1. If you're hooked and want to know even more about Stephen and Anthony's experiences in the police, then subscribe to The Blue Way on Spotify or YouTube now so you don't miss episodes 2 and 3 when they come out, or you can check out the links in the show notes. Here's a sneak peek of what's coming up in episode 2.
There's other people where you don't even get a chance to explain. It goes from 0 to 100 real quick.
We have 2 types of policing that we refer to, proactive and reactive.
By the time I retired, I think we had guns, tasers, flashlights, pepper spray.
I was there for the 7/7 bombings and had a huge role to play in that because we were on call at the time.
He pulls out a gun there at the desk and they had a shootout at the front desk.
So we called it the Valentine's Day Massacre. And I got a proper kick in. I turned up with 2 black eyes back home.
For a lot of guys, especially the younger guys, when you put the uniform on, you feel powerful. That's something that a lot of officers need to learn.
Hello, is this thing on? Okay, good. I am sorry to interrupt your listening pleasure, but my name is Tiffany, and I'm here to tell you about my podcast, True Crime Connections. It's an advocacy podcast that talks with real survivors about real shit. This is the place you want to be if you've been in a toxic relationship or anything tragic has happened to you and you're looking to find your strength and healing. No 2 episodes are alike, but they all give you useful tools that you can take with you. So make sure to find me on your favorite podcast platform, or you can go to truecrimeconnections.com and come join the Hope Building community. See you there.